So I am, as Chloe very kindly said, also I want to thank MIT, thank Chloe, Zach, Gadaminas for being here and for inviting myself and my colleagues, you'll hear from them later, to talk about these things. We're so excited to be here to engage with all the brilliant minds here, to talk about how the Alberses, Josef and Anni Albers' legacy continues on in places like this. So I gave a paper a couple of months ago that was pretty close to a topic that I wanted to talk about. And so I thought, well, I'll just tweak this paper slightly and I'll present this to you all. And I think that will pick us up in a nice spot.
Do you want to just move it up a little bit?
Is this a little bit better?
Yeah?
A
Okay.
little bit better. All right, good. All right, so as Chloe said, my name is Fritz Horstman. I am Education Director at the Albers Foundation, but I think it's also important to note that I'm an artist, so I understand most of this stuff through actually working with materials myself, with my own hands. I consider there to be great intelligence in our hands, in my hands, in your hands, and when I have my hands into a material, I understand it best. That said, I'm going to give a fairly art historical sounding presentation now. I'm going to speak today about the material studies that flourished at the Bauhaus and how they migrated to the US and beyond through the teaching of Anni Albers, Josef Albers, and Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, the last of whom was mentor to Georgi Kepes, which will bring us to MIT. My co-panelist, Gadaminas, will pick things up from there, following the idea of material studies forward. Through it all, we will see technologies embraced and eschewed, sometimes simultaneously. I will focus primarily on the ways that this has informed certain art practices of the last 100 years. The Bauhaus didn't emerge fully formed from a vacuum. It was a crystallization of ideas that had been stirring for decades. The so-called Bauhaus aesthetic that we now might envision, clean lines, no ornament, industrial materials, was far from the reality of the material and design experiments happening in the school's workshops when it opened in 1919. This material study from Johannes Itten's 1921 preliminary course is jaunty and expressive and uses materials in clever ways, but it doesn't have what many would now consider to be a Bauhaus look about it. This seeming disconnect can be understood with a bit of context. The Industrial Revolution had arrived 2 centuries earlier. For all the benefits that it provided, a common complaint, aside from pollution and child labor, was that the products that came out of the factories were inferior to what had once been made by artists and craftspeople. An early response to that was the arts and crafts movement, which formed in the mid-19th century in England. Its founder, William Morris, proclaimed that his company, Morris & Company, made goods for the people and by the people. Essentially, Morris hoped to put the materials back into the hands of designers. Arts and crafts led to Art Nouveau and the so-called whiplash motif, with which it came to be associated. Though an emphasis remained on the work of artists and craftspeople, machines came to be an indispensable part of production. As objects became more ornate and the materials more expensive, the reality of any of this being for the people became less and less possible. Into these conflicted ethics and aesthetics came the great disruption of World War I. Forming in its wake, the Bauhaus can be seen as a reaction to all of this. The moment of the whiplash was past, and the terrors wrought by machinery in the war were fresh in everyone's memory. Simultaneously, the field of modern anthropology was gaining traction with a growing interest in what was then referred to as primitivist cultures, which were popularly connoted with the romantic ideals of a pre-modern, pre-war existence. This was much discussed in the early years of the Bauhaus, where classroom experiments evince handmade engagements with mundane materials, intentionally eschewing traditional art materials like marble and gold leafing. Those early material studies elevated and celebrated what could be done with the everyday stuff of the modern world. From 1919 until 1923, just 4 years, this very untidy and perhaps from our current perspective, un-Bauhaus aesthetic held sway. Though it took very little time for the Bauhaus to turn the page on their primitivist beginnings, changing their motto from art and craft, a new unity, to art and industry, a new unity in 1923, those very early years were crucial in establishing material studies as the common point from which incoming students would begin. That turn towards industrialism in the institution's mission came about in part because the Bauhaus was under pressure from their state sponsors to show what their students were doing, which came with intense financial pressure, which does sound somewhat similar to some things happening at this very moment. A curriculum that could engage with the potential growth of industry was understandable. Material studies persisted, though morphing to fit with the school's new motto. further explaining the Bauhaus's rapid evolution from so-called primitivism to something closer to industrial design, in 1922, 3 figures associated with international constructivism arrived in Weimar. Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, known as Moholy, who would soon join the Bauhaus faculty, convened with Dutch painter Theo van Doesburg and the Russian painter L. Lissitzky. Concurrent with exhibitions of Russian art in major German cities, the pro-machine ideology and abstract anti-pictorial imagery these 3 endorsed found fertile ground in the nebulous early Bauhaus. An aspect of this approach was an emphasis on the Russian word factura, meaning relationship with the inherent properties of materials and their structural arrangement. Though the specific structures we see here wouldn't have been seen in Weimar, their constructivist message informed the Bauhaus material studies already underway. Both Josef Albers, who would take over the preliminary course in 1928, and Moholy parsed and distilled this idea into a triumvirate of essential qualities of all material studies: structure, facture, and texture, wherein structure describes how a material was formed. Was it grown like a tree, cast like concrete, or something else? Facture describes what was done with the material, twisted, hammered, cut, and so on, while texture is the surface appearance that results from the combination of structure and facture. This is, of course, quite obvious in a way. Its power lies in its ability to bring very complicated material ideas down to a fundamental level for closer inspection. Itten framed his material studies as a form of self-expression. When he left the Bauhaus in 1922, he was replaced in the preliminary course by Moholy, who kept material studies at the center of the course, but turned his students' attention to how their materials might have industrial applications. He had a quasi-scientific approach in which he asked students to create material studies that could be experienced repeatedly. Through repetition, students could begin to interpret their experiences of given materials. So in this example, there's this arrow that indicates where our fingers are meant to slide over these materials. We don't exactly know what those materials are now. This is a 99-year-old photograph, but perhaps it's strips of leather and then paper and then maybe glass and some other things. And then just below that is a subjective drawing that the student made, that Gustav Hassenpflug made, where he's interpreting what those sensations are. And again, it's subjective, it's his interpretation, but it's a repeatable event, so he can say, well, here it feels like circles, here it feels like dashes, here it feels like triangles, and so on. So again, this quasi-scientific approach. Anni Albers, who arrived at the Bauhaus as a student in 1922, and so was exposed to Moholy's teaching, was commissioned in 1929 by then Bauhaus director Hannes Meyer to create a fabric that would dampen the echoes in an auditorium he'd designed for a new trade union school in Bernau, Germany, just north of Berlin. In addition to muffling echoes, the fabric Albers designed had the twin purpose of also brightening the room. Creating a 2-sided fabric, she wove soft cotton chenille on one side while using shiny cellophane thread on the other. And I believe that my colleague Chris will be speaking specifically about this later on today. The chenille would face into the wall to absorb echoes, while the cellophane, a new material in 1929, faced into the room, reflecting light and brightening the space. For this elegant solution, which embodied the spirit of the school's material studies, Albers was awarded her Bauhaus diploma. If Itten's students' material studies were about self-expression and Moholy's were about industrial application, Josef Albers' Bauhaus students were asked to find the natural expression of their materials. What could be done with one material that was unique and unlike other materials? Take, for example, this wire screen that was manipulated by a student named Liz Bosian. Anecdotally, we understand that Albers would hand out a material like wire screen to every student, then leave the room for 2 hours. Coming back, he would critique their work. Anyone who had turned the wire screen into some representational thing like a boat or a house had missed the point. Bosian, who seems to have stuck a pencil or skewer into the screen repeatedly, relied on the wire's memory to hold the shape of the rod in a particular way, allowing this composition to take shape. Of course, the same action could have been applied to paper or clay or something else, and holes would likely have resulted, but only this material would yield this specific result. Of the structure, facture, texture triumvirate, Albers may have been most focused on structure while he was at the Bauhaus. Paper folding was a perennial assignment, as were various challenges to make towers of different materials. In this case, he was examining work students had made from corrugated cardboard and paper. It was typical of these assignments that students were allowed no tape and no glue to make the structures. Here, a tower has been made from a single piece of paper from which there was no waste. Similarly, this tower was made from a single piece of metal, cut into triangles and parallelograms. A close look reveals that a small amount of material remains uncut at every juncture. The ductility of the metal is exploited, creating a rhythmic structure unique to the materials with no waste, no welding, no glue, and no tape. In 1938, the Museum of Modern Art in New York mounted a hugely influential Bauhaus exhibition featuring some 700 objects created at the school, including these two structure studies, as seen with the exhibition's director, a former Bauhausler named Herbert Bayer. By this point, the Alberses and Moholy were already in the US, and we'll catch up to them in just a moment. This is just to emphasize the importance and avant-garde nature of the curricula that they brought with them. Under pressure from the Nazis, the Bauhaus closed in 1933. That same year, the Alberses accepted an invitation to come to the US to teach at the newly formed Black Mountain College, a small liberal arts college outside Asheville, North Carolina. With them, they brought the learning by doing approach to education of the Bauhaus, as well as their devotion to material studies, which they began to call the Matière. So, small aside, in Germany, they referred to material studies as Materiestudien, or sometimes nature studies. When they arrived in the US, for reasons that we have some insight into, they started calling this study the Matière, using the French word. Years later, Josef Albers explained that he understood that the French word matière had more of a visual connotation than the English word matter or material. And so they landed on the matière and stayed with that ever after. Josef continued to teach paper folding, drawing out its textural and structural potentials. It was the depths of the Great Depression, and so money for art materials was scant. Assignments that could be made from everyday objects that were free for the taking made sense, making the matière a natural fit for the new school. It became such a popular assignment that reportedly students not even in Albers' classes made matières in their free time. A song was written on the subject, where structure had been perhaps the most important aspect of Albers' students' Bauhaus material studies. At Black Mountain College, matières became more poetic. I think of them in terms of what can be called our visual haptic sensation, how something looks like it would feel. Haptic being our sense of touch, and visual being sight, of course. When juxtaposed, different materials' visual haptic qualities will inform one another. In the case of this matière, made of crumpled craft paper, rough concrete, and white glass, the feeling of the crumpled paper is accentuated by the roughness of the concrete, the crispness of the concrete enhanced by the crunch of the paper. Both are in sharp contrast to and amplified by the shiny white glass. Or this bed of moss on which glass beads have been strewn. A first read that they are water drops is quickly discarded due to scale. I remain confused, however, that they are indeed hard glass, as I imagine touching them and having them burst like water drops. Anni Albers instilled in her weaving students the importance of texture in textile. One of the assignments that she gave them had them create texture studies from materials that couldn't necessarily be woven, but needed to appear that they had been. She called these pre-textile studies. Students quickly realized that for the illusion to work, there needed to be a vertical and horizontal orientation within the material, something that would indicate the structure of their woven fabric. With that idea in place, a wide variety of materials could lend their texture to the assignment, including twisted paper at left and corn kernels at right. Another pre-textile study was making lots of tiny pinpricked holes into paper to create a repeated texture out of that. There will be a workshop devoted to that in this very room between 3 and 5, right? No, 2 and 4. Between 2 and 4. Another pre-textile study were typewriter studies. And so you can look and very easily see that the top one is just backslashes and underscores in this tight repetition. With its horizontal and vertical orientation that comes with a typewriter, you get a textile-like study. And again, we will have a workshop close to this in the 2 to 4 hour slot. Anni Albers instilled in her weaving students the importance of a texture of, sorry, we already covered that. Ruth Asawa was a student of both Alberses at Black Mountain College, who remained a friend for years afterwards. Accompanying the Albers on one of their many trips to Mexico, Asawa learned the technique of crocheting wire from local artists who used it to make egg baskets. She went on to create undulating sculptures that are a unique material expression of metal wire. Of course, other linear materials such as wool yarn could be crocheted, but only metal wire is capable of these particular structures. Moving to the Bay Area after leaving Black Mountain College, Asawa became deeply involved in teaching art in the public schools. One of her signature projects was essentially a material study in which the material was the ubiquitous milk carton. The Black Mountain College alum to achieve the greatest level of recognition is without question Robert Rauschenberg. Studying there intermittently from 1948 to 1952, he overlapped with both Josef Albers and the composer John Cage, both of whom left indelible marks on his practice, though he was more fond of the latter. He and Albers famously butted heads, while Cage remained a friend well after they'd both left Black Mountain. The popularity of ALBERSxMIT assignment infused Black Mountain culture, and paper folding remained a staple of the curriculum until he left the school in 1949. Just 1 year out from his time at Black Mountain, Rauschenberg produced paper painting, comprising a glass box filled with crumpled tissue paper. What a succinct way to embark on a career that could be seen as a decades-long investigation into material studies. That same year, he produced dirt painting for John Cage. While still a student, Rauschenberg made a series of white paintings, which were just that, plain white canvases. Cage, who was teaching at Black Mountain at the time, later credited those paintings as encouragement to explore silence in his music, which led to the canonical and still controversial 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which during its performance, which lasts as long as the title indicates, not a note is played. Instead, the sounds of the concert hall, coughs, wind, creaking chairs, food containers being opened, make up the music, much as the shadows or reflected light would make up the imagery of Rauschenberg's white paintings. That he dedicated dirt painting to Cage is not only a sweet gesture between friends, but a challenge to include dirt, whatever that may be, into one's art. Dirt could be defined as anything not welcome in an established order or as something worthless. Wasn't the imperative of the early years of the Bauhaus to elevate mundane materials to the level of art? Wasn't that precisely what drove the myriad métiers at Black Mountain College? In any case, both Cage and Rauschenberg ran for decades with the idea of bringing dirt through a wide variety of means into the context of the art gallery and concert hall. 2 years after making dirt painting, Rauschenberg made Bed. Among his most recognizable works, it is an extraordinary example of the evocative power of a material study. In the early 1960s, Rauschenberg approached the engineer Billy Kluver about collaborating on a project that would become Oracle. Oracle is an interactive environment. Each of the 5 sculptures contains an AM radio, which is constantly scanning. The viewer can control the speed of the scanning, but the 5 radios will never align. The Rauschenberg-Kluver collaboration led to the founding in 1966 of Experiments in Art and Technology, or EAT, a nonprofit service organization whose goal was to promote collaborations between artists, engineers, and scientists. Eventually including 28 regional chapters across the US, EAT was crucial in many instances of bringing new technologies into art and vice versa. The full story of EAT would take much longer than I have here, so this is just to say that though many of the material studies we have looked at intentionally engage with simple tools, what we could call old technologies, this branch of material studies wove itself tightly into new technologies. To follow another strand of material studies out of the Bauhaus and into the US, let's return to Moholy. Having left the Bauhaus in 1928, he spent a few years in London before emigrating to Chicago, where in 1937 he founded the new Bauhaus, which was quickly absorbed into the Illinois Institute of Technology. Around the same time, his students' material studies were featured prominently in the 1938 MoMA Bauhaus exhibition. So here we see 2 tactile studies where presumably you were invited to run your fingers over those textures. Fellow Hungarian Georgi Kepes came to Chicago to study with and later teach alongside Moholy. These were the war years in the Institute of Technology, like many institutions, felt pressure to prove their worth to the war effort. Based on Moholy's structure, facture, texture curriculum, Kepes developed a course in camouflage, which gained a great deal of attention. Not a project of his own creation, but following the principles he set forth and which came directly from the Bauhaus material studies, Boeing's Seattle facility, a prime target for bombing, was made to look from above like it was a residential neighborhood. The deceit through material manipulation is a fascinating example of one way that material studies developed. Kepes left Illinois for MIT in 1946, where in 1967 he founded the Center for Advanced Visual Studies, which became a hotbed for experimentation with new materials and the latest technologies. In some sense, it was a natural outgrowth of the industrial-leaning material studies that Moholy students had created 40 years before. In his own art, Kepish continued to explore materials, creating works such as this Lichtenberg figure in which an electrical discharge was applied to a photographic film. It is, of course, a great inaccuracy to say that all work that might be called a material study can be traced to either the Alberses or Moholy. Before and since, others have found ways to focus on the fundamental properties of materials for both artistic and design purposes, many with no clear connection to any of the schools or movements discussed here. But it is also true that both the Alberses and Moholy had many students who themselves had many students, and that their message has been perpetuated. Rauschenberg, Asawa, and Kepish all benefited from being 1 degree of separation from the headwaters. I leave it to you to consider other artists, designers, and technologists of the last century and how their work may show evidence of these and other approaches to material studies. In the last few years, there's been a surge of artists who are emphatically seeking out ways to engage directly with material. Sometimes it is in response to or in coordination with advancements in technology. Sometimes it is an all-out rejection of it, something in the spirit of those early Bauhausers who eschewed the machines that had so recently caused such violence. As ever, Anni Albers can offer counsel. In her 1965 book On Weaving, in the section devoted to texture, she writes, "Just as only a trained eye and a receptive mind are able to discover meaning in the language of colors, so it takes these and in addition an acute sensitivity to tactile articulation to discover meaning in that of matière. Thus, the task today is to train this sensitivity in order to regain a faculty that once was so naturally ours." It's as if she wrote it for this very day. The task today is to train our senses. All right, thank you.
This was great, and I guess I should build further, continuing looking into Kepish. I don't have a paper here, so I will talk based on the slides, and I want to show also one of the film, if we have some time, from the Center of Advanced Visual Studies. As you can see, this is from the center book proposal, and it is not for public distribution. So early years of CAVS, Center for Advanced Visual Studies, as Fritz already introduced, was founded by Georgi Kepish, who was Moholy Nagy student and apprentice who came to the United States before the Second World War and after the experiment of reestablishment, trying to reestablish the Bauhaus in Chicago, in Illinois, Institute of Technology. He got an invitation to MIT, 45. So he was teaching in the Department of Architecture, drawing, and it's actually quite interesting in the present discussion about importance of drawing and visual literacy here at MIT. And in '67, he founded the center. So the early years, of course, the Center of Advanced Visual Studies is informed by the series of the books titled Vision and Value that Kepish published, edited. It's a series of volumes that Kepish edited in the '60s. And these books, we could say that is writing the founding or grappling with the founding of manifesto of the center. The books bringing number of scientists from physics, biology, anthropology, math, and so on and so forth, also political theory, with the idea to really build transdisciplinary dialogue. So the Center for Advanced Visual Studies is really sort of like stages this transdisciplinary dialogue across the fields with the idea to bring artists to MIT to engage with science and emerging technology. In the center of this is the philosophy of building art on the 3 pillars: art on the civic scale, art on an environmental scale, and also art as information. And of course, we can add to that light art, but that's kind of like a subsection of information. So information here becomes really a central cornerstone because there is this transition from the image to information. And I think this is really important transition that is happening, starting from the Bauhaus, and then fully kind of like being embraced and immersed by the Center for Advanced Visual Studies. So the Arts on the Environment is, of course, the volume that is very much informed and inspired by the cybernetics becoming a meta theory that perhaps through this moment of the history becomes a meta theory that replaces the philosophy, if you will, and the limits of growth. Of course, we have Jay Forrester, who's professor at the School of at the Sloan School of Business and Management at the time, a mathematician, who comes with this idea that built on the mathematical modeling and mathematical calculation, we can kind of like envision the development of this planet, given the resources, or whether we're looking into the building of the cities or urban sprawl, or so. Limits to growth, of course, is very much inspiring also to the Kepesh and his contemporaries, as they're also looking into the Whitehead's theory of the philosophy of the organism, right? So philosophy of the organism, that is inversion, according to Whitehead, as inversion to Kantian philosophy, kind of like where the world emerges out of the subject. So here, the subject kind of like, emerges out of what Whitehead is calling the super jet, which is kind of like the world that is in becoming. So the subject is also seen as kind of like as in becoming, and what Fritz also mentioned about the senses, right? So the senses play a very important role, because we are really sort of like talking about the importance of information and also the relationship between the body and the environment. So for the Kepesh, this kind of like building of the subject as a kind of idea of composibility, built on the idea of composibility. So the thinking and the subject emerges out of this relationship with the surrounding environment. So this worldview is in the book of Arts and the Environment of Kepesh, which is becoming a programmatic book for the Center of Advanced Visual Studies, but also all the cybernetic experimentation. So there is also a very interesting link with psychedelia. If you're looking whether at Gordon Pass or Stafford Beer, so there is this also kind of like maybe even connection with something that we could describe as the dialectics or dialectical tension between the physics and metaphysics. So invisible world, auratic world. So here I want to share with you a few also images, not only of Kepesh work, but also of his contemporaries in the first years of the Center for Advanced Visual Studies. So here you can see Kepesh and the first fellows of the time, Harold Tovish and Otto Pine, who, along with Vasilikis Takis and also others, are really getting interested in on one hand, into the laws of physics, but also gravitation, and also the ideas of the kinetic sculptures. But they see these kinetic sculptures more as kind of like as the organisms, as kind of like as the living organisms. So machines in relation to body and in relation to the environment, machines, artwork as machines. They are actually grappling with the idea that Kepesh proposes that artworks are like couplings with the environment, right? So it's sort of like that building on the idea of cybernetic feedback loop, right? So the artworks are connecting the human world with the environment. So this is kind of like there is this connection that is built with the environment, and of course we could say Kepesh invites artists to engage with the environment, but nevertheless, when we're looking from today's perspective, these experiments taking place in the gallery, right? And of course, we might get puzzled why these experiments taking place in the gallery, but in the large extent, within the MIT's lab culture, the gallery is also seen as a laboratory, right? So with controlled environment of light, with controlled environment of sound, with controlled kind of like acoustic condition, where the environmental factors and inputs back to the system or through the artwork can be, more in the controlled kind of like framework. So looking more into the experiments, we see also not only a kinetic experiment, but also we see experiments with light, and the light is very important. It has one importance, the civic importance on one hand, because this is the artist who came after the Second World War experience to the United States, who also experienced the bombed Europe and also Europe being bombed and under the threat of war. And of course, the cities during the Second World War, they were darkened. So living in this condition of the war in the dark cities, for them the light acquired very important civic meaning. So bringing the light, on one hand, as part of the civic program, on the other hand, playing with light, following this idea of homo ludens, or, the Huizinga's kind of like idea of the homo ludens. So playing with light, playing with water. We have also Kappish engagement and collaboration with American urbanist Kevin Lynch that is focusing on the river, so playing with the water, and several artists are embracing that, but also playing with light, And then these kinetic machines, kind of like as not kind of like as machines, but as living organisms, right? So they're seen as living organisms, something that connects human body and the environment. So of course, Wang Tsai is important. Kappish, his own work, we know his work not only in the photography. For some reason, I didn't bring his examples of painting or his photos, but I want to bring kind of like works that are changing, that are shifting, that are shape-shifting. So there is this material experimentation that is very much informed by their scientific findings, whether in chemistry or in physics, right? Because given the access to the scientific labs and his ongoing dialogue and discussion with a number of scientists across MIT, and this is one of these works, photoelastic, that is kind of like shape-shifting, but also color shifting. So it's working with chromatic kind of like experimentation. Also his work, Flame Orchard, is working not only with light, but works actually with gases, works with flame. So it is also temperature and kind of like morphos kind of like form. So there's very interesting also. Dialectics that emerges with the material in the times when also dematerialization becomes kind of like a buzzword between 66, 72. We have the 6 years of dematerialization, and I think this idea of the tension between the form and the formless, right, becomes also important part of these experiments. So. I'm arriving to this kind of like center word that is called center beam. Of course, it refers not just kind of like to the notion of the center in the semantic kind of like terms, but very literally refers to the center of advanced visual studies. So what do they mean by the beam? So first of all, it is collaborative effort. Many of these works that I was sharing with you are built as a collaborative effort. Yes, the artist is credited, but behind the artist there is a number of engineers, a number of other collaborations. So maybe we should kind of like expand on that list. It is very important to mention because the center beam becomes kind of like epitomizes that spirit of collaboration. There were 14 artists and 14 engineers across MIT involved in engineering of the center beam. It is being staged in Documenta 6 in 77 in Kassel. That is a very important exhibition in contemporary art world, and number of artists. Here we have Laura Bush, but also Harriet Kazint-Silver, Aldo Tambellini, who are in this image. And the center beam is we could say it is machine or apparatus in becoming. It works with this idea of the shapeshifter and also material shifter. It also kind of like techno-biomorphous machine that constantly emanates different type of images that are projected on the states of the water, from the still water to the vapor water to the steam. So there is a cold kind of and also hot, and these different constituencies of the water, the different physical constituencies of the water, providing the screen for the holography, for the laser, for the video, for the 8mm, also projections, including the sound projections also on the steam. And it is working during the timeline of the, so it is not just performance for the opening, but the machine is operative during the timeline of the exhibition, and that's, as we know, documented last 100 days. But to make this quite a complex apparatus, in terms of engineering and in terms of its functionality, operative for the 100 days, is quite a challenge. Therefore, it requires this very intense collaboration between artist and scientist. So we see holography projection. You can see here the steam. So another important aspect here is also poetry. Also poetry projections on the steam, laser projections. So later on, center beam is being reconstructed in the National Mall in Washington in the year. And I will share, if we still have some time. Have a good time.
A couple minutes.
Couple of minutes. Okay, so maybe, maybe I will just skim through these images very quickly. But what is interesting for me is this kind of like really material and non-material, material and anti-material kind of tension, right? That these artists are building on, looking into the image, but also looking into kind of like what deconstructs the image, right? As we see also collaborations with TV and Charlotte Morman and Namjoon Paik, Betsy Connors, who works with holography, Bill Seaman, and of course we have transition to the mediated images, television, and different kind of like experimentation, different media forms, including the laser disc, so of course they are transitioning through for a lot of media experimentation as this becomes also one of the threats, in the center. Maybe I could switch to this film.
Artists contributed to center projects, whether in residence in Boston or from the midst of their travels and artistic ventures.
So here you can see documentation from documentary.
Lowry Burgess's drawings defined a consensus of the 15 artists, 5 students, and 5 scientists who met for months, formulating a multimedia project known as Centerbeam. Centerbeam provided a disturbing presence in the staid gardens of the 1977 Documenta 6 in Kassel, Germany. It was a popular success, with the public fascinated by its spirited, glowing, steaming, spouting, undeniably physical presence, while critics pondered its unorthodox dimension. Now Centerbeam appears to have foreshadowed current trends towards multimedia and industrial design. The artists uncovered the spirit in technology through their labor on Centerbeam.
Ganz klar. Das ist ein Wind. Das sind nur die Oberflächenströmung.
Alors, pourquoi? Les couleurs. Non, pourquoi il y a de la glace? Oh, j'ai pas compris non.
What snow fell here this face recalls. Anode, diode, electrode, night. Necklace, street, split light. Diamond taxis on ice.
Okay, maybe I could stop here and just to wrap up. I want to say that so these works, they were seen as organisms that epistemologically connected to the environment through information rather than simple sensation. And this is really important epistemology that is focusing on the real rather than illusionary and imagined vision in consultation with touch and other senses as part of total environment of the organism. Thank you.
Okay, hi. Show of hands, who's new here to the Media Lab? Okay, so I see, yeah, so it's really amazing. I see a lot of new faces. Show of hands, who works here or studies here at the Media Lab? Okay, so I want to do I do this a lot, but I'm asking everybody to stand up for a second, just because there's so many new people here. I want you to put your left hand in the air, and then I want you to look around and put that hand on the shoulder of somebody that you don't know.
You know each other.
And then I want you to put your right hand in the air and try to find somebody else that you don't know. And then I want you to really quickly make an introduction. Introduce yourself. Make a new friend. Yeah. And then when you're ready, make some new friends. And then when you're ready, you can have a seat. So I'm gonna get started. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So we're so excited. We're so grateful that you're here. We want to thank Chloe for help organizing this, the Albers Foundation for coming, the Morningside Design Academy for supporting it, and just want to give you a quick introduction to the work that we do here at the Media Lab, especially this is for folks that are not from the Media Lab, so I'll quickly talk about our group, Future Sketches, and we were so lucky to have Chloe as an artist in residence last year, and then she invited us all to the Albers Foundation, so this is like a kind of, connecting all these dots. So I help run a group here called Future Sketches. I think there's some Future Sketches people here in the audience. We're looking at the intersection of art, design, technology. Media Lab has about 25 different groups focusing on all different topics. Our group is on kind of what are tools that artists and designers will be using in the future. We will work with code. Everything you see is kind of created with computation. Jensen Huang recently said kids shouldn't learn to code, they should leave it up to AI. We fundamentally disagree. We think that code and computation is the central medium of our lifetime, and it's not just a technical medium, but an artistic and a cultural medium. So we try to explore the culture of code. We write code to make images, we write code to make animations, we write code to make interactive works. Oftentimes very weird things, weird instruments. Char made this hat animation. Oftentimes taking something very simple like just opening and closing your finger as a starting point, using the familiar to explore the unfamiliar. We make artifacts and tools, we make kind of experiments, but we also make open source tools for people to make work with. And the thing that we like to focus on in the group is that the tools we make today inform the art we can make tomorrow. We've been exploring how to fabricate in new ways. This is a programming language for 3D printers where you can take simple objects and drag and drop them to create forms that can be 3D printed. So kind of a playful way to engage with kind of creating new forms. This is a tool for morphing from one letter to another or one shape to another that has been used for kind of experiments with typography. Thinking of light, Dexter in the group was very inspired by this building has really beautiful light. And for his thesis project, he looked at the movement of light over time and wrote computer vision algorithms to track that, and then take that data and cut shapes of glass. So to make a kind of sculpture, a glass sculpture, which is informed by the movement of light in a space, and then bring it back into the space almost as a kind of offering to the architecture. He's also been building kind of drawing tools that take his gesture as input and building lamps and building kind of forms based on sketching as input. This is a tool for creating a kind of Chinese stamp. And a lot of times the interesting works are the algorithms for trying to figure out how to kind of design and lay things out. Vera from the group has been taking a knitting machine, computational knitting machine, and found a way to connect that to kind of modern software. So she knits garments where she uses the shape of the garment to inform the pattern that she's knitting, or she's even done knitted animations. So she just knits out the frames of animations and stitches them together. Char in the group has been looking at Gaussian splatting, which is a technique for, with a very few photographs, making a 3D model, and then using that in a kind of creative way to explore how that data can be kind of modified. And I was thinking of those three words, I can't remember what they are.
Structure, texture, facture.
Yeah, I feel like that's a lot of what we're doing in the group. Tools for typography, puppeteering people, taking your body as an input, connecting your body to typography. So whatever letter of the alphabet you look closest to, it's quite hard to use. You can do every letter, but it's quite hard. This is a augmented reality typography, writing type in the air. This is a augmented reality poem, so wearing glasses, you walk through the language of a poem. Experiments with typography that Vera in the group's been doing. So again, building these kind of tools, but then making artifacts with the tools. Generative AI, drawing a few characters to make a letter, make all the letters of the font. Char in the group did this really fun project where she looked at all the moments where Olympic athletes look like letters of the alphabet. So when they're diving or doing breakdancing or gymnastics. Rebecca in the group's been exploring computational patterns, this Islamic pattern, trying to find a kind of algorithm for creating really unique shapes with this kind of an algorithm approach to a traditional pattern system. We've been kind of building new tools for coding, drawing as coding. Jessica in the group has been exploring parameter space and specifically designing kind of algorithms where you can have a computational system and you can click on one item and see all the variations. So it's almost like zooming in and out of all the different possible variations of an algorithm. Char and Jessica in the group are really big into this field called live coding, where they're performing live. So actually taking the idea of coding and bringing it onto the stage or in the club, away from just like doing it in a classroom. And Char's been making, taking this place, this is where we typically write code. It's very intimidating and very kind of uncreative, and trying to find a kind of creative, make it much more creative and playful and engaging, and building interfaces that use machine learning in a way to kind of engage with your code, rewrite your code, and comment on your code as you're coding. And we've also been, as we're doing this kind of work, we've been inviting in different researchers that are doing kind of amazing work to talk to us and talk to the community about their work. And quickly, at MIT, that we have this concept of demo. There's a phrase, demo or die, that's very famous here. You're always making demos. But the word demo, very easily, you can rearrange the letters and make the word poem. So just to give you a kind of introduction to the work of the group, we're really interested in making poems with technology. So not making demos. I think when you're making demos, you're sort of saying like, oh, this is a demo of machine learning or a demo of AR, but we're trying to make poems and poetry with the work, and the technology is oftentimes in service of poetry. And then the thing that I wanted to mention that we're so touched to have the Albers Foundation here is that I teach a class at the Media Lab. Also just to say, just as a quick aside, we have an exhibition open at the MIT Museum. So if you do have a time, if you're kind of new to the MIT or the Media Lab, we have an exhibition about typography that just opened. It's just around the corner. Definitely go check it out. You can see Char's amazing Olympic type work and other kinds of projects there. But I teach a class here at the Media Lab called Recreating the Past, where we recreate work. The whole idea is that I come in and every week I give a lecture about a different artist and designer. And I do give a lecture about Anni Albers. We study Anni Albers one week. And the class is inspired by this book, The Art of Computer Designing by Osamu Sato. This is a book from the 90s. This Japanese designer, super cool book about how you can use the computer to make all kinds of different graphical forms. And at the end, he's thanking people. And he says, I would like to acknowledge my favorites, Russian avant-garde, futurism, and Bauhaus, whose brilliant typefaces and designs have in many ways shaped my own mind. If the artists of those movements were alive now to work with computers, I am certain they would discover new artistic possibilities. The work of past ages accumulates and is remade again. And I think this sentence is super beautiful. The work of past ages accumulates and is remade again. And I think it's beautiful because it's almost like an invitation for us to engage with the past, an invitation for us to have a conversation with the past. It's also like an obligation for students to say that it's almost your job in a way to recreate the past using today's voice, today's tools, today's intention. So every week I'll come in and give a lecture about a different artist and designer, like Muriel Cooper, who helped create MIT Media Lab, who's the design director of MIT Press. And we studied her work, the work of her students, and then the homework assignment is to recreate one work. Vera Molnar, Hungarian artist, who writes code to control a pen plotter. The students have to take one of her pieces and reverse engineer it or recreate it. And I just wanted to mention about the classes a little bit like this. I don't know if you've ever been to the museum and you see people actually like painting a painting or sketching, like doing this kind of work. The whole idea is to try to have a conversation and see the world the way the artist sees it, to try to imagine or kind of look with their eyes. It's a little bit like this game of Spot the Difference. If you remember this game as a kid, kind of seeing like, oh, what are these differences? But I actually think that action of looking really closely at an original and a recreation, that is almost in a way training your eyes. You start to look at and think about the differences, and that careful looking, I think, is a key to craft. That actually craft is about attention and care and material, and specifically this idea of kind of really looking, really being kind of closely looking at things. And so I just wanted to share a few examples. Every week we talk about different artists and designers, but I wanted to share examples of recreating Anni Albers' work. And my students have so much fun kind of engaging with the original work and then looking at a recreation and trying to reverse engineer it and think about what are the algorithmic approaches behind the work. And actually I was like preparing for this, I found so many examples. So I'm only showing a few here, but it's just been super fun to see students kind of like getting excited about the work, but also trying to explore even elements of weaving, or playing with the kind of language of weaving, explore that in kind of terms of computer graphics. Just want to show a few of these examples of kind of students engaging with Anni Albers' work. Oftentimes they animate it, they bring it to life, they make it interactive or kind of playful. And the whole idea is to kind of have a conversation. That's why I'm so excited that we're here today. We're going to be able to have this kind of conversation with the Albers, and yeah, super thankful. And then finally, just to say, we're really lucky and honored to have Chloe with us last year, and so excited that she came back to organize this. So I'm going to pass it over to Chloe. Thank you.
I'm really grateful that everyone is here, and it's nice because I'm basically like a product of the Bauhaus because I went to Parsons and we have like foundation year and a lot of training that happens in art school from kind of getting your hands dirty and into material, and so it's nice to see the progression from this like very materials-based education into more immaterial and then kind of back into material, which is kind of I think a lot of the work that Zach's been working on. So I trained at Parsons, mostly in textiles and thinking about materials in different ways. And I focus on textiles because I think they're super fascinating, and of course they're kind of the perfect iteration of the realm between visible and invisible because they're made, of course, from this binary code that's kind of translated into the material plane. They're kind of between like the 2D and the 3D. They're between the personal and the public, and so there's this kind of space in textile that's really rich for exploration. And so I started initially kind of thinking about language and kind of how we translate different forms of expression into materials. So how does this kind of idea of the conceptual or the imaginary become material and become embedded within our materials? So I'm based in Paris, and I work on these 18th century, and the one on the right is 1970s loom. And so I trained for 3 years at the National Tapestry Workshop in Paris, which is kind of an interesting place because tapestry historically is extremely tied to image, especially in Western Europe. So traditionally a painter would make like a fresco or something, and then it would be translated into a woven form to kind of take it elsewhere. And there was very little exploration of weaving as its own material, and it was also extremely guarded from innovation or shift because it was part of kind of a national agenda of kind of soft power politics in France. So there's kind of been very little evolution of the actual technique. And so the initial kind of, and I think this is also where Zach and I really get along, is I don't know how to code at all, but I certainly know how to write. And I was kind of thinking about weaving text or weaving kind of a programmable material. So the sort of early iterations of weaving code, air quotes, is kind of thinking about this material that involves writing or painting directly on paper and then stripping it so that it actually becomes like a program material. And from there, I kind of fell into the world of programming by working with Google Arts and Culture and kind of thinking about, okay, so we have now these materials that are material and they're metallic or metal based, but then connected to electricity and a small computer, you can actually program meaning or information within the material as it interacts with the body. So any, I'm sure everyone here knows, but any metallic element can be kind of made into a button. And so this idea that you can reinsert the body into the experience of interacting with material, and I think this is something that a lot of the Bauhaus and their descendants were interested in. So this idea of inserting the body within the material was kind of at the core. And I don't think I have time to show, but I also collaborated with a composer named Caroline Shaw who did all the music for it. And she was amazing because I asked her to make individual sounds for every single letter, and she was kind of game, which was really nice. And then sort of more recent works kind of look at thinking about plants and woven materials based out of plants or made out of plants as programmed materials. So this was just kind of a recent exhibition that I showed at Palais de Tokyo, where I wove invasive plant species as tapestry work, and then collaborated with different composers to make these kind of like culturally ambiguous materials. So the sound in them is both from Eastern Europe and kind of some North African sounds as well, but then so basically, according to where you touch, it will kind of set off a different sound composition. And then sort of moving more deeply into the body, I've also been collaborating with dancers and thinking about the body itself as an interface. So in this specific iteration, we made garments that were programmed with different sounds based on what region of the body was touched. And so you had these two dancers that were kind of interacting and setting off different sounds based on kind of where they were touching one another. And then finally, I just wanted to end. So I've been collaborating actually here at the Media Lab with a researcher who's not here at this time, otherwise he would be up here with me, but Cedric Launay, who works here and has been working on miniaturizing different conductive elements and kind of making a PCB so small that it could be integrated into a yarn. And I've been his kind of like weaving duo. And so this is kind of a piece that we did together, kind of thinking about like if you can actually program a material directly and have information directly embedded within the textile rather than having a conductive element that's connected to something else. And we paired it with the same kind of plant-based materials to think about if plants could speak through materials, what would they say, and what would be their, I guess, chosen form of language. So we worked with setting up a like a little, like a heart monitor directly on the plant, and then captivating some of their frequencies so that you could actually recognize or find the same frequency of the plant within the lighting element once you touched it. And for that, I worked with traditional weavers in the center of France to make the actual lighting element. And then, so once you actually touched it, it actually vibrated at the same frequency as the plant. Okay, and that's it for me. Thank you so much, you guys.